I don't think, I think that the real benefit here is the process that we go through that brings public attention to the entranceways, the entranceways of the town. I think that, we may only spend $35,000, and maybe some of the private landowners will say, you know what, I'm going to do what I can right here without us spending any more money. We'll see. But I think that the process of going through this, involving the stakeholders, getting this moving forward, having us have a chance to think about, how this could look differently, having a community discussion about this over the next few months is the way to go. And so I'm happy to do this, and if I can, I'd like to suggest that we proceed that way in the form of a motion, if that's what it takes. I'd like to just move this along and let this happen and see what we get.
I think Tim's got. Okay.
Or no.
So,
Or
well,
is
no,
that
you
not what
can.
you want?
You may, of course. That's fine. If formalize that motion, then, if you would, please.
Sure. Well, I guess I would just.
Can I ask one more question first?
You can. Yeah, I can. I can not. I would just like to see us move it forward. 'Cause I think it's a good
I
thing.
guess when I'm looking at where in the process does the $35,000 get spent? Is it after the steering committee decides what comes first, what comes second, what comes third, and have it design done for each of those?
That's how I was proposing to approach it, is that we as staff would support the group. We'd work through the general concept of the, consideration of the elements that are identified in the corridor. The steering committee can certainly articulate what, specific locations or areas that they think should be priority areas. We'll talk about legally what we can and cannot achieve. There's some that are outside the corporate limits. There are some that are inside that are legal nonconforming as far as private property land uses, and talk about realistic what we can achieve in some locations, and then also identify where we can do improvements in some other locations, and then see what the committee would recommend. We would not necessarily, it's my anticipation that we would not expend any funds until they've identified that these are the top three, top five, maybe one in each entryway, whatever the number might be. And we've identified key projects, and then we would look at design efforts in those key areas. We could do some visualizations that the council could look at for potential improvements to show aesthetically what it could look like, and then some landscape designs, whether that's civil designs for landscape walls or landscaping improvements. We would target it on those top key locations. We'd have an inventory of all the potential locations for installation, and we would identify rough round figure costs for all of those, but we would only move into design work on those key locations of the steering committee felt were the highest priorities.
So you could actually get designs for your money. We get something for the money.
Correct. I'm not proposing
Not
to
just-
spend the money for a consultant to write a plan. The plan itself, I would anticipate, is going to be fairly brief because we're going to write it. What we were hoping to focus the efforts on the consultant was design cost estimation for specific improvements in specifically identified and targeted areas. At least that's how staff has suggested. With the funding that's available, you would get a very generalized plan without any actual design and very rough costs because it's just too large a project to try to spend that little money on.
Sue, I kind of liken this to the mobility task force efforts to identify those key little pieces that for a modest investment would make a huge difference. And in this case, it pertains to the aesthetics of the community.
Yeah, I'd like to get one or two things done. and
Exactly.
not worry
Yeah,
about the
exactly. Tim, I saw your hand a long time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I feel better, Bill, that the $35,000 isn't going to a study, a 3-ring binder that'll be a doorstop. It's now beginning to sound like a percentage, perhaps a large percentage of the $35,000 will actually be used to complete some of the ideas that the committee comes up with. Is that
At least the
what you
design
said?
and cost estimating of it, but not, and possibly, I mean, we'll have to get into it and through once we identify a consultant and we work through costs for design efforts. At least my goal would be at the end of the project that there would be actual designs and hard cost estimates for the identified priority improvements. And then we could see how we can economize through the effort to see if any of those funds would actually be available for construction or development of any improvements. But we'll just have to see as we get into the effort.
One final word, and I don't know if this is a fair comparison, but the real estate agents that I've had come and evaluate my property prior to sale always suggest that curb appeal is as important as the interior, perhaps more. And I do think it's important that the entrances to the city of Moscow are presentable, that do look good. And whether you're an 18-wheeler rolling through town at 35 miles an hour, or you're a new instructor coming to the University of Idaho or to the public school system, and it's your first time rolling through town, I think it is important that the entrances to the city look good. So now that we've talked about the money and where it's going to go, I'm even more confident that I'm going to support this.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If I may, the concept here, as I understand it, is to try to address some things that are along our highway corridors that may not be the most attractive. And, you know, as Bill's talked about, there are some limitations on what we can do as a city with that respect. There are some efforts that we have already undertaken over the last several years in the form of some small landscape areas and xeriscape style landscaping out on State Highway 8 on both ends of the city, working with adjacent property owners, developing planting plans in-house, and using volunteers to plant some of those areas with the adjacent property owners doing maintenance. Those types of projects are small and generally have very little cost attached to them, but they do create that feeling that, you know, you're not just looking at a continuous stream of concrete and asphalt as you work your way into a city. And so we like those in that they're small, we can accomplish them, they're low cost, we get the buy-in from the neighbors, and they start to build somewhat of that grassroots approach to, you know, look what they've done over here. And, you know, I've got a little patch of unused ground here that's just pavement. You know, if I could have some help, maybe from the city, to pull up some asphalt and come up with some ideas and some volunteers, we could do something like that here. And those kind of efforts I have seen really grow. And as somebody commented here earlier, you start seeing, you know, what your neighbors have done, and then you can appreciate that, you know, if I do that or something similar, then there's a longer stretch of area that's not all asphalt. We have a little more green, we have a little more landscaping, you know, just to improve that overall aesthetic. You know, some of the things Bill's talked about have been, you know, a little broader than that, in that he's looking at, you know, some signage and some screening and some other things that could help some of the bigger picture. For me, and some of the things we've done on the public works side, working a little smaller scale works as well. And I think they meld together quite well. We can do some of the planning in-house. We can do the mapping in-house, identify potential locations for those smaller scale type of projects, identify locations perhaps for some larger, more impactful projects that perhaps the money would go to for design, but develop a package that then creates a nicer looking corridor in small bites along the way, and it may take years to get there, but at least you have a concept, you have an overall map, and you can just start pinpointing individual places to start the ball rolling, and then hopefully you'll get some buy-in from the neighbors along the way, and eventually you get to where you want to go. So I mean, to me, it's you know, not, it doesn't have to be this massive undertaking. It really just is something that we can develop internally that says, here's a program, here's a plan, just like we do with sidewalks now, that says, let's start working our way through this. And I think you'll find that over time, people will like it, and you will see much more interest in the community in trying to improve those routes into town and just improve the overall aesthetic coming into the city.
And Les, while it may not pertain directly to this discussion tonight, the opportunities for volunteers are many, but we don't always hear about them at the same time as volunteers come forward. So anybody who's listening here, or including city staff, if you have projects that could use a whole bunch of volunteers, I have them chomping at the bit here trying to figure out how they can help community in some way. And so they're very anxious to get out and, get their hands dirty, dig some holes, pull some weeds, whatever it might be. And so please let me know if you know of those things. Wayne, I saw your hand next, and then Walter.
Bill, what would be your time frame for completing this study?
We're thinking 4 to 5 months.
Okay.
Walter?
Bill, in response to a question from the other end of the table here a while ago, talking about the sequence of events, I think I heard you say that the steering committee would start initially trying to put parameters around or identify areas or that type of thing first, and that the consultant would come in after the fact to put into cost estimates and design elements and so forth the things that the steering committee had pointed out they were interested in seeing occur. Is that somewhat?
Generally, there may be instances where we'd have a consultant come in early in the project just to suggest some concept ideas or just share information, not to lead the project, but if there's some sample projects they had done in other communities or information that they wish to share, or if there are questions the committee may have, there may be some attendance there. But the goal would be not to have them lead the effort, prepare the plan, to be to focus the funding that's available to the actual design work to be one of the later components in the project.
And I believe the questioner a few moments ago was asking the question in the framework of when are you going to spend the $35,000. The project schedule in your memo talks about initiating the RFQ process immediately, even before the steering committee is formed. Mm-hmm. And once you put out an RFP and hire a consultant, it's got task elements. I presume it's going to be a task element paid process. Correct. Or a per hour or something. Correct. So my point is, just so the council understands, the $35,000 is going to be committed right up front. I mean, short of you invoking the paragraph that says the city can revoke this contract anytime they want to if we decide not to move forward, and that cuts off the money. But I just didn't want any of the council people to think we're going to see a steering committee, we're going to see some work done. 2 or 3 months from now, we'll be putting out an RFP for $35,000 for a consultant. And if the steering committee's work doesn't please the council, they could pull the plug and never go to the RFQ. The RFQ is proposed to hit the streets within a matter of weeks.
Correct. We did not anticipate structuring it as a contract for a fixed amount, as we would anticipate structuring as a T&M or task negotiated basis. So we do an RFQ and then control the expenditure through the project based on task orders. And
just to finish, as someone that responds to RFQs, RFPs on task projects, if I were to know that a city's task process might stop before it ever gets started, I would never respond to it in the first place. I would presume if I do my work, I will get paid for the entire amount of the contract that we negotiate. And therefore, I think I'm just trying to make the point that the $35,000 is going to be committed pretty much up front. And if that's okay with the council, that's what it is.
Make a motion.
No, I'm not. What's the council
So how
think?
can you, I was just going to ask Walter a question. How would you structure it so that you could get the steering committee and the priorities and then get the consultant to design it? How do you do that?
Am I?
Please.
You make a motion to do it that way.
to not put out the RFQ until
Correct.
the steering
That's
committee
how you
has
do it.
identified it?
That's how you do it. Try to get a second and see if you can get it passed.
Well, that's the motion that I would make, that we follow the plan of the getting the steering committee and identifying the areas, the priority areas, and then hiring after that's been identified and the city council has approved however many areas we decide we want to approve, that then we hire a consultant to design it. It's a long motion, but that's the general idea of what I'm trying to do.
I have a motion. Do I hear a second?
Nope, you don't like that. Okay.
Well, I think
Come up with something better.
Sue, I need to have you restate your motion
Okay.
in a little more concise terms,
Okay,
please.
the way to follow the.
I know what you're saying, but just restate it in a concise method.
To instruct staff to start the process of forming the steering committee to identify and prioritize the projects, and then after council approves them, for council approval, and then hire someone to design them.